Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Norma Jean entitled Deathrattle, Sing For Me. This is the 9th studio album from Norma Jean, an American metalcore crew hailing from Atlanta, Georgia to be specific. I'm familiar with a decent chunk of their discography. Like, I remember reviewing Wrongdoers on an old metal blog, and I know that I've talked about All Hail here on the Metal Meltdown in some capacity. Their first two albums as well, Bless the Martyr and Kiss the Child, and Oh God, The Aftermath, are classics of 2000s metalcore and mathcore as well. Like, legit really good fucking albums. Definitely recommend you check those out if you get the chance, if you haven't already. But the rest of their discography, I'm not as familiar with. Like, I don't think I've ever listened to The Anti-Mother, Meridonial, Polar Similar. I didn't even know that they were at some point called Ludicrous, and that they had released an album as Ludicrous in 2001. That's literally brand new fucking information to me. The point being, I may not be an expert in general, but especially not on Norma Jean, but I do feel comfortable in telling you, based on what I do know, and based on what I'm now learning, that Norma Jean have gone through a bunch of different phases and a bunch of different styles over the course of the past 20 years or so of their existence. Like, they're definitely a metalcore band, but they've also played around with post-hardcore, mathcore, noise rock, nu metal. Norma Jean also has what I like to call a revolving door lineup. A lot of people coming and going from the band. At this point in 2022, they do not operate with a single original or founding member at the helm. In fact, as far as I can tell, Deathrattle Sings For Me marks the first time in a long time in which there have been no major or drastic changes to Norma Jean's lineup and foundation. And all of this information makes it pretty clear why Deathrattle Sings For Me is the way that it is. It is, in a lot of ways, a tighter and more cohesive record than All Hail. But in other ways, it's also a more confused and aimless record. Almost as if it's unclear on what stylistic direction it wants to move forward in, as it balances the classic Norma Jean metalcore sound that longtime fans know and want, with newer ideas and newer influences from some of the subgenres we've mentioned, but also from, weirdly, sludge metal and alternative rock. Opening track 1994, for instance, is a scabby, anxious sludge metal bruiser that feels every bit as abrasive as it does claustrophobic. There are these huge lurching riffs covered in slime and sludge and like these really aggressive kind of hardcore shouts and screams. There's a sludgy breakdown that just kind of monotonously repeats and chugs over and over and over again, almost bringing to mind like a really meticulous kind of I Hate God style number. And then, in appropriately I Hate God style fashion, the track closes out not with a bang, but with a whimper, as wailing guitars covered in fuzz and crusty bits and pieces, and noisy sequences, and elongated vocal passages, and guitar feedback all just kind of quietly fade out. It almost sounds as though Norma Jean is being viciously dragged out of the studio. For what reason, I don't know, but they're sure as hell not happy about it. And on some level, I like it because of how just heavy and demented it is. But I also don't like it because it just opens this entire album on such a big what the fuck kind of note. And that kind of sets the mood for the entire album, even as it gets funkier and weirder, and even as it begins to lean further back into some more straightforward American metalcore style material. For instance, Call for the Blood kind of sounds like if Cancer Bats went through this like depressive phase, like if they just started listening to a bunch of like shoegaze and post-metal and like Deftones style stuff, because like there are these supercharged like metalcore, hardcore riffs and beats and vocals, but there are also some really dreary and melancholic and somber vocals and atmospheric sections. The same can kind of be said for Spearmint, although it also has these really technical kind of mathcore riffs and rhythms, and a chorus that would not be out of place on a more straightforward kind of late 90s, early 2000s post-hardcore song. Then there's Penny Margs, which at first kind of feels like a very slow-paced kind of alt-rock ballad, but eventually it channels a kind of emotional urgency and intensity that, honest to God, I expect more from black gaze than I do from metalcore, which is then complemented by some agonizing vocal screams and wails and some legitimately soul-crushing metalcore grooves. It feels kind of like this weird hodgepodge of, like, Mechanical Animals era Marilyn Manson with, like, classic metalcore vibes and New Bermuda era Death Heaven. I don't know, man. It's kind of weird. It's nice to see that these guys are comfortable going into weirder, crazier, more unpredictable territory, but, like, a lot of it just doesn't really make sense, and it feels awkward and a little clueless. A big problem with this record, too, is that Norma Jean doesn't really know how to edit their own material. I mean, the album has 13 tracks when it could make do with realistically 9 or 10, and the closing number in particular, Heartache, is 8 minutes and 13 seconds long, and it could easily make do with being 5 minutes and 13 seconds long. Like, there are all these passages and sections with, like, soft-spoken vocals and these more progressive kind of guitar arrangements, and cool, but, like, the actual meat and potatoes of the track, like the actual chorus and the actual verse, that's where the impact is. That's the best part of this. That's the meat. The rest of this is fat and gristle. Now, there are, in my opinion, a few tracks that balance a lot of the ideas we've talked about on this record pretty effectively. For instance, Area Obscura feels like a solid combination of the alt-rock and the classic Norma Jean metalcore influences. This thing is filled with some really great performances. It's filled with some of the biggest, tightest, gnarliest grooves on the record. And then there's also Any Percent, which is just a chaotic, bloodthirsty kind of classic metallic hardcore rager. But unfortunately, these two tracks aren't enough to convince me that what I have here is a great album from start to finish. I will note, this is not a horrible album by any stretch, and I have enjoyed, on some level, a good chunk of the songs we've talked about, warts and all. In fact, I really appreciate 1994 and Penny Margs for just being, like, totally wild and unpredictable on every fucking level. Like, I did not at all expect Norma Jean to tap into sludge metal and black gaze on either of these fucking songs. Plus, performance and production-wise, this thing is pretty tight across the fucking board. But again, the songcraft, the songwriting, it's still so incohesive and as I said before, confused. What we have here is a record that is focused and unfocused at the same time, and a version of Norma Jean that apparently thinks pretty highly of itself, but I think deep down is also subconsciously unsure of itself and what it wants to be and what it wants to do. For these reasons, I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5. Like, this is a great example of a mixed bag. There's stuff on here I like, stuff on here I don't like, stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work. The road in which Norma Jean decided to drive down on this record was not fully paved, and it consistently shows on this record. So my advice to Norma Jean would be to make sure that whatever road they drive down next, make sure it's fully paved. Make sure you know where you're going. That would be pretty cool and great of you. 2.5 out of 5. Warts and all, it's okay. Yeah. I don't even really know what else to say. It's okay. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.